What's up, everybody? This is Jan for Chess24. We're gonna take a look at another Grandmaster encounter in this video, the game between David Navara, the Czech #1, and Fabiano Caruana, the US. I'm not even sure if he's #1 or #2. Keeps switching places with Hikaru Nakamura. They faced each other in the Tata Steel Masters, the first super tournament of the year going on in the Dutch town of Wijk aan Zee. David Navara, not a great result at the time this game was played. In round number 8 he was on -1, but he had played some great chess. I've covered his game against Anish Giri in a separate video. He also had an exciting game against world champion Magnus Carlsen, but the wins haven't been there. For Fabiano Caruana, things have been going well. He's been working out, as you can see in the picture, and he's been scoring well. Is in the shared lead with Magnus Carlsen on 5 out of 7 before this game starts. So let's jump right into it. Navara with the white pieces goes for the move 1 d4, and Caruana, who's fluent in many languages, he speaks English, Nimzo-Indian, Grunfeld, Slav, Ragozin, Queen's Gambit declined, you name it, goes for e6. Knight to c3, bishop b4. And one reason I was attracted to this game, apart from the fact that it's a very good game, is that Navara employs my system. It's not really mine, but it's a system I recommended in a video series for Chess24. In this position, the move knight to f3. The main move is a3. Bishop takes, queen takes, and here either d5 or b6, with a huge body of theory attached to it. Knight f3, bit of a sideline, even though more and more people have been employing it, so it is not a complete secret. Caruana chooses the most principled move c5, some other options here. b6 is not supposed to be good because of e4, while d5 is a very playable move when white has a choice between a3 and c takes d5. For details, of course, check out my video series. c5 was the move played in the game, immediately challenging the pawn on d4. d takes c5 is more or less forced, and here we see the point of black's play is to go knight to a6, intending to take with the knight on c5 and then quickly bring this knight to e4. Using the fact that white is committed to an early knight f3 and some other Nimzo lines, this is less critical because white could still control this square. Still, nothing new so far. g3, the main move in this position. Morozevich has dabbled with the move c6 here, but hasn't found many followers. And g3 also the move I recommended. Knight takes c2, knight takes c5, bishop to g2. Now black has a choice. He could develop quietly something like b6, short castles, bishop to b7, where I believe white has decent chances to gain a small advantage, but it is a perfectly playable line. Instead, Caruana goes for the critical move knight ce4, trying to inflict white with doubled pawns on the c-file as quickly as possible. Bishop d2 is a legal move, but giving up this bishop doesn't feel very dangerous for black. Therefore, Navara plays the critical move short castles, accepting these double pawns. Knight takes c3, b takes c3, bishop to e7. All of this still mainstream theory. White needs to do something before the defects in his structure become obvious. Therefore he goes e4, threatening e5, gaining a lot of space. Black has to react, has to play d6, sort of stopping e5, but not really, since it's still the move you play, the move you want to play. d takes e5, knight takes e5, and we start seeing the structure that is very typical for these lines. White has his weak c-pawns, but he has very active pieces with his bishops able to enter the game very quickly. So are the rooks. So black has to make a couple of very precise moves here to neutralize the pressure. Queen to c7, this is the main line, challenging this knight and this pawn here. White should not be tempted to play bishop f4, which looks obvious, but it runs into g5, picking up a piece. So not going to be able to do it. Therefore, white has to play the more flexible and slightly more humble move queen e2, defending both these attacked pieces. Pawn is not a piece, but you get what I'm trying to say. When black still follows the main line, knight to d7, challenging this knight on e5. Bishop d6, another move that often transposes. Knight d7, now white goes bishop f4, speedy development, but it's advantageous for black to exchange these knights, therefore that's what Caruana does. There's more theory attached to all these moves and the sidelines, but I'm gonna rush through them to get to the critical moment. All of this, still nothing new. Bishop d6. Here, white has a choice between bishop takes d6 and the move played in the game. I believe also the move I recommended, the move rook to e1, rook fe1, when we're slowly arriving at the critical position. In this position, which has still been played, to my mind, the critical test is bishop takes e5, queen takes e5, and now black has a choice between grabbing this pawn, which is possible but dangerous. White has good compensation because of his active pieces. It's hard for black to finish development, and he has a tempting choice here. For my recommendation in this position, check out my video series. I believe there's a couple options like rook d1, rook ed1, rook a1, a4, and I would probably tell you which move I gave if I remembered. Instead, after queen takes e5, black can also go queen takes e5. This is my game amongst others against Paco Vallejo, rook takes e5, rook d8. When once again, white has a rotten structure, but black suffers from his lack of development and has to be precise to equalize here. I played c5, there's alternatives, rook b1. And Paco Vallejo played very precisely, made a draw, but it's not a line that is an automatic draw. Black still has to know what he's doing here. End of our theory X course. Caruana played the move rook to b8, which I don't think I even mentioned. It's such a strange move to me. The idea is very logical to play b6 and bishop b7, but it is very slow because you give up control of the d file, which I thought was a bigger factor. Navara had still checked this. He played rook ad1 very quickly. Now black has nothing better than going for this endgame. And we see he has relinquished the control of the d file, which is a problem, but in return he's gained time to play the move b6, when if he got one more move in bishop to b7, all his problems would disappear. Therefore, white has to act, and that's what Navara does. Plays c5, trying not only to get rid of his weaknesses, but also to pose problems before black can play his move bishop b7. Because if you do it here, then c6 comes, and that's obviously bad news. B takes c5 is a legal move, but after rook takes c5, this rook would land on c7 and still ask some pretty unpleasant questions. Therefore, Caruana played f6, trying to separate this rook from this pawn, but white has a little tactic to prevent that. Cute little Zwischenzug, c takes b6. Now, f takes e5 is not the prize of ideas, because after b takes a7, white at the very least wins his rook back with a winning advantage, because the black structure is ruined and he's also short on pawns. Therefore, c takes b6 had to be met with a takes b6. Now the rook retreats. Curiously, Navara chooses rook e2. He said this was the end of his preparation, but he couldn't remember if he had prepared rook e3 or rook e2 or rook e1. Rook e2 looks logical because this rook can be used to attack the b pawn, but it also has a drawback which is going to become apparent later in the game. And I believe with rook e3 or rook e1 you could also maintain a bit of an advantage. Rook e2 played, king f7, logical move trying to bring the king closer to the center. It's a bit early for black to go e5, which looks logical, but it relinquishes this key square on d5, which the white bishop would happily occupy. Therefore, king f7 a little more flexible. And here, Navara plays a logical move, which turns out to be extremely double-edged. Plays the move f4. This is a typical idea in the structure to stop black from going e5, gain some space, clear the way for his king towards the queen side. But it really spices things up, because with the rook on e2, black has a tactical chance here that Fabiano Caruana seizes. If he doesn't do this, he's just a little worse. He goes for e5. And the point is, if white takes, which happened in the game, black has the move bishop to g4, winning an exchange. I was commentating this game live with Peter Svidler, and we were very confused because we thought that Navara maybe had blundered an exchange, but nothing could be further from the truth. He had checked all these lines, and while his opponent was thinking, not at home, and had come to the conclusion that he has enough play here, and rightly so it seems like. He plays the move e6 check when black faces an important choice. The most humble and maybe most prudent choice was to go bishop takes e6, of course giving up on the idea of winning an exchange, but eliminating this dangerous pawn immediately, when white has some tricks, but it would be very hard to prove an advantage here. One try, for example, is rook to d6, targeting this bishop, bishop to c4, and rook to d7 check. When white is still asking some questions, after the obvious king to g6, rook e7, sort of unpleasant, because if you go rook f7 to cover the g7 pawn, then white has the Zwischenzug, bishop e4 check, black has to go f5, rook f7, bishop f7, and bishop takes f5, with an endgame a pawn up. Who knows, it might still be possible to draw this, but it's certainly not something you want. Therefore, black has to do better, and maybe this is what Caruana missed. He could have played king g8 here, which is counterintuitive. You don't want to lock your king up on the 8th rank, but the key difference is that after rook e7, rook f7 is now playable without losing a pawn, and black equalizes. Some other tries, let me show you one more, just because it's cute. White could also try rook de1, which once again is best met by moving this bishop to f5 or c4. But if black plays rook e8, this is an instructive blunder, and I just wanted to share this position. Rook e6, bishop d5, rook be8, and here the key move g4. It now turns out that whatever black does, he will never be able to break this pin, and white has an easily winning position. For example, let's say h6, h4, g6, king to f2, white does nothing, and you can see black can't free himself. If he tries f5, white rubs it in by going g5, stopping king f6, and black is going to run out of moves and lose the game. But as mentioned, not forced. Still, Caruana played a more ambitious move, the move king to g6. He's saying, what do you think you're doing? You gave me an exchange and you're going to get away with it by just returning a pawn. Not going to happen. He goes king g6. And here another very strong move. The move bishop to e4 check was played. Because after a slower move, let's say rook d2, bishop takes e2, rook takes e2, looks like white has play with e7, bishop c6, or if he manages to put his bishop to d5 and play c4, he's also fine. But black has a very precise rook bc8, stopping bishop c6 and targeting the c-pawn when black is better. Therefore, you have to do something else, and the answer is bishop e4 check. Asking this king what his future plans are. The most obvious move is king to h6, and this is a position that's very hard to evaluate, that maybe would have been the critical test of Navara's idea of sacrificing the exchange. Now white has nothing better than going king to f2, black takes, king takes, and let's say rook fe8 with a very sharp position. The alternative is rook bc8 as we've seen in the other line, but then rook to d6 is posing problems. Once again, bishop c6 is the idea. And one key difference is that this king is now far away from the action on h6. It can never step to f7. Therefore, black's life is by no means easy here. Rook takes c3, rook takes b6. This pawn still being alive is something that the computer needs a while to accept how strong it is here. It still gives a black advantage, but I believe it is white pushing for a win here. More precise was maybe rook fe8, rook to d6, and f5, returning the pawn to distract this bishop, when after bishop takes f5, black is in time to activate his king with king g5, king f6, and should be fine. While if bishop to c6, then rook to e7, and once again white should have enough compensation for the exchange, but no more than that. So these positions maybe is what Caruana should have gone for after he decided not to take on e6. But he played a more natural move. He played the move f5, pairing the check with a counter-attack against this bishop, which at first sight looks very strong. White has to act, and act he does. He plays the move e7, clearing the d6 square for his rook in order to give a check there, and therefore, therewith, trying to save some of his material. If rook e8, for example, rook d6 check, the king doesn't have a great square to go to. Let's say it goes to h5. Still looks good for black, doesn't it? The bishop is under attack, the rook is under attack, there's no more checks. But here, a key move that had to be foreseen decides the issue in white's favor, the move bishop to d3. Quite a little move. And the point is, if black takes on e2, bishop takes, king to g5, h4 happens to be checkmate. So a lot of calculation involved in all of this stuff. Rook f6 here was impossible because of rook d8. Therefore, after f5, black has nothing better than returning, or he didn't even get the time to take it and enjoy his extra exchange. Therefore, he doesn't have anything better than accepting the exchange of rooks. After e takes f8, rook takes f8, the game is transformed to an endgame with equal material. Both sides have rook and bishop and 4 pawns. White still has some pawn weaknesses, but he also still has activity. So it is black to be who has to be precise here in order to hold the draw. Oh, I'm sorry, I mixed up the move order. Navara started with rook d6 check, not with e takes f8, which is more accurate because rook f6 can be met with rook to d8. Still not the end of the story, but not something you want to do over the board. Therefore, Caruana played king g5, and now he took on f8, reaching the same position, but he forced his king to go to g5 already. Bishop d5, and here I was supposed to give my speech about activity versus pawn weaknesses. Black has to be careful, his king is a little out of the game, and there are some targets in his position, but he should still have good chances to hold the game. Rook f6 was played, rook to d7, and king to h6 maybe was a better chance for black to go king g6 here, keeping the king a little closer, when after king f2, bishop b5, rook to c7, rook d6, all this stuff is going to happen in the game. c4, bishop e8. If white goes rook c8, which we are going to see in the game, now black has bishop f7 because king on g6 controls that square. While on h6 it's a little far away from the action. Of course, all of this is time travel and it's small nuances. But in the game, Navara manages to execute some more pressure. King f2, bishop to b5, targeting this rook, rook to c7, rook to d6. Logical course of events, trying to coordinate his pieces a little better. But maybe instead of rook to d6, it was time to grab some space on the king side, play f4, trying to exchange his pawn. It's a line given by Navara himself. Or the alternative, g5, pointed out by Peter Svidler, to grab some space there after c4, go bishop e8, then bring this bishop around to the king side, and black should hold the position. He always has to be careful because white has a long-term plan to break through on the queen side, create an a-pawn, but here he should have enough play. After rook d6, c4, bishop to e8, things got a little tougher because here rook c8, as mentioned, there's no bishop f7 because the king is on h6. And the bishop doesn't really have a convenient square, while white has a very easy plan of activating his king, and black is struggling. Bishop d7 looks logical, but runs into rook d8, pinning the bishop, and black is really running out of useful things to do. He has to bring his king closer, that's what he does, king g6, king e3, king f6, king d4, but now we see that white managed to achieve more or less complete control. This king does a good job of covering the e5 square, but it's gonna have to give it up because it also has to fight against the pin before white breaks through with either c5 or a4, a5 followed by c5. Therefore king e7 was forced, rook to g8, once again targeting some weaknesses in black's position. If the king returns to f6, then rook f8 is asking some very unpleasant questions. Mainly, where do you want to put the king? But the point is king e7 runs into rook f7, losing, while king g5, king e5, this king once again manages to occupy the best square it has on the board. So rook g6 had to be played when black is very, very passive, and white, of course, seizes the chance to go king to e5 with more or less complete domination. Still not obvious how to break through, but it's very hard for black to come up with useful moves. Rook g5 was tried by Caruana, trying to, just maintain the status quo. Rook to b8, targeting this guy. The rook has to return. Rook h8, some maneuvering. Rook h6 and h4, improving his coordination. And in some lines, introducing the option of going h5. Also just avoiding the loss of a pawn after rook takes h2. Bishop e6, still desperately trying to use his pieces, but the problem remains that bishop takes d5, c takes d5, doesn't really improve black's position, therefore white can pretty much ignore this bishop. Navara keeps maneuvering, goes rook a8, hinting at potential trouble coming from the other side. Bishop had to retreat because the rook ending is pretty much hopeless. And rook h8, once again, some maneuvering to make it to the time control. Bishop back to e6, and white changes plans, goes a4. Now going for the knockout blow with either a5 followed by c5 or c5 followed by a5, creating a passed pawn under the right circumstances. The bishop retreated to d7, rook a8. Could have gotten this position earlier, but now they've made it way past the time control, and therefore Navara switches to decisive action. But he's also following the rule of good technique. Don't hurry if you have a winning position. It's fine to repeat moves once or twice and make your opponent guess. A winning position is maybe strong. If you have a better position trying to convert and the advantage is stable, you don't have to hurry up. Let your opponent suffer a little bit. Here, however, he goes for rook to a7, asking more questions, when the most resilient was probably to play king to d8, stepping out of this pin, when white still would have to do some work to convert his advantage, but he has excellent chances in many lines. One try, for example, is h5. If rook takes g3, then king to d6 decides. Black can't survive this for very long. For example, bishop to c8, a5 takes, and c5. And even though white is 2 pawns down, his position is just too dominating. We're gonna see something very similar in the game. But instead, after king d8, h5, black could still hang around by going rook to h6. And there's no apparent breakthrough, even though it is very unpleasant. For example, bishop f3. Still, Caruana decided to cash in a pawn, probably hoping if you minimize the number of pawns that white has left, then in some lines he might be able to sacrifice his bishop for the c-pawn, and with only one h-pawn remaining it would be very hard for white to break through. But he never achieved that, because now after a5, the breakthrough I've been talking about, b takes a5, c5, threatening c6, he's just not in time even to give up his bishop. The point is, after king d8, white does not want to play c6. When after bishop c6, he has a lot of work to do. Who knows if he's winning here? Maybe he is, maybe he's not. But there's a much easier solution, which Navara of course spotted. And it is the move, not king d6, which would be kind of dumb because of rook g6 check. But the one way to prevent this defensive resource, rook to g6, is to play the move h5, which I said it's an easier solution, but I was actually very impressed by it, because to give up 2 pawns and then play this quiet move h5, not cashing in with c6, but just preparing king to d6, and it turns out that there's nothing black can do about it, is excellent endgame technique. Caruana, yeah, is lost. There's just no way to stop the threat of king d6. He tried f4, looks logical, trying to distract the white king, but no such luck. The king goes to d6 anyway. Now black can't keep his bishop on this diagonal. To give it up for the c-pawn, for example, bishop b5 is pretty well met by rook a8 checkmate. So bishop c8 has to be played. Now the c-pawn has a say c6, rook to g5. There's already many ways to win this position, but Navara chooses, in my opinion, the most beautiful one, the move bishop to f7, controlling the e8 square and threatening c7 checkmate. This was a game which deserves a much more detailed analysis than the one I've been giving. First, I'm not sure why I didn't go into more detail, mainly because I don't understand all the subtleties. Then there's also the time restrictions I put on myself in these videos. But it was a very impressive display of a mixture. Endgame technique, opening preparation, being brazen, sacrificing the exchange, and defeating the great Fabiano Caruana is not an easy thing to do. I was very impressed with the decision to play f4 and go for this exchange sacrifice, even though the consequences were very unclear, put a lot of pressure practically, and then the technique to convert his advantage was very much flawless. The decisive breakthrough a5 takes c5, king d8, and the key move h5. Very nice stuff by David Navara, who earned his first victory in the Tata Steel Masters. There's still a lot of rounds to play if you want to check out my live commentary together with Super Grandmaster Peter Svidler. Join us any day on chess24.com. Thank you guys for watching this video, and hopefully see you around soon. Bye bye.